Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to us by listeners like you. We're asking that you go onto Facebook and like us. If you do that, we have a giveaway going on right now. We're actually giving away a $5 gift card to the Which Side Media Collective store, as well as a free copy of the animal rights film Living Things. So go on to Facebook, find our page, like us, and then find the giveaway. If you don't have Facebook and you want to be a part of giveaways and you have another social media that you use, hit us up on it. Hit us up on Twitter. Hit us up on Instagram. And if we have enough response from that, then we'll totally do giveaways on that too. You can find all of our social media at whichsidepodcast.com. Just click on the social tag.
This is episode 192.
Yeah, we talked with Drew Winter.
So Drew has his guide to community organizing was published in Educating in Action, Strategies for Igniting Social Justice. He also wrote a history and analysis of food not bombs that was published in Anarchism and Animal Liberation, essays on complementary elements of total liberation. And he's done a shit ton of other work. Needless to say, this dude is way smarter than I am. And I fucking love this conversation. A lot of fun. Little bit of Game of Thrones talk, which is, it's all right. I haven't watched the new season yet, so don't worry. No spoilers. But it's all fun, so stick around for that.
Everyone dies. Everyone.
Everyone. Hey, Jordan, what news and events do we have going on this week?
Well, if you're going to be in Salt Lake City, come on over to West Valley Library on Tuesday and write yourself a prisoner with Salt Lake Anarchist Black Cross.
Thanks for moving that so I can actually go.
Yeah, we actually moved the location and the time to accommodate people better. Also, in Italy on June 30th, a mink farm was vandalized. That's a delayed report. In Germany on July 2nd, 5 hunting towers were destroyed. In Czech Republic, foxes were liberated from hunting dog training center on July 4th. And 4 hunting towers were overturned and burned in France on July 6th. And in Sweden, windows were smashed and stink bombs were thrown at a meat shop.
Way to go, y'all.
This week's listener shoutout comes from Rich Lavery. Rich wanted to say, I was interested to hear you guys talk about Gary Yourofsky this week. I myself emailed him after he encouraged it through his site last year. I was going through the process of becoming foster carer. The social workers had issues with me being vegan, and I contacted Gary to ask for his opinion on the matter, and even advice on what to do. In response, he accused me of hating animals because I was choosing to help humans, used some pretty discriminatory language regarding kids, and used some horrific language towards myself. He said I was a shit vegan for considering letting my kids in my care eat animal products. I never said that's what I wanted to do, and basically called me a speciesist. I've since boycotted anything he's involved with and encouraged people not to view all vegans that way. I think if I'd contacted him before going vegan, he would very likely have put me off making the change. You guys rule. Keep doing what you're doing. I love your podcast. Peace, Rich.
Rich, you're awesome. Thank you. And as somebody else who's interested in foster care, shoot me a note. Let me know how that turned out for you.
If you'd like to shout out an episode, just head on over to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the shout out tab, and you can find out how you can do that as well.
For the slingshot this week, July 15th, 1917. 50 fucking thousand. They don't say 50 fucking thousand, they just say 50,000, but I'm throwing that emphasis in there because 50 fucking thousand lumberjacks went on strike for the 8-hour workday.
You can thank those lumberjacks.
Getting that amount of people out fighting for class issues, workers' issues, could you imagine doing that today?
50,000 people doing anything is amazing.
It's pretty fucking amazing, right?
I bet you can't get 50,000 people free tickets to a movie.
Gee, I know. So, thank you. I think it's the first time ever in my life I've thanked lumberjacks. But, yeah.
It's an odd thing. It's
It
like
is.
miners in union labor movement.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a part of it.
It's totally they're part of the worker struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. If you like these little tidbits of history, I pulled them out of the Slingshot Personal Organizer. Go pick yourself up one. If you haven't yet, it's a little late in the year, but never too late. So swing on over to your local info shop or an online info shop like AK Press.
I really hope you enjoy this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Luckily enough, we didn't hit record for any of that. So,
Are you kidding me?
yeah, I know.
That's like my whole bit. I have nothing else prepared. So,
Bummer.
do you just want to try and retrace our steps and do it all over again?
Let's
or?
try to redo that organically again, can we?
Exactly. Just as close to word for word as possible.
So, besides waiting for Game of Thrones, how is your day going?
My day's going okay. I mean, I'm not in the Texas heat anymore, so that always makes me happy. Texas at this time of year is just pretty much you walk outside and you just burst into flames. So it's really annoying. And I have friends who are from Texas originally. I'm just down here because I'm going to the university here. But I have friends who are from here who are like, "Come on, let's go outside. It's so nice." And I'm like, "Look, I'm from Michigan, and anything over 70 degrees is just not okay." And so, like, I've convinced some of my friends to, like, go inside where they turn the AC up too high, actually. But it's better than spontaneous combustion.
So you coming from Michigan, your winters are probably worse than ours. But what I hate about the Utah weather is that we get, the really fucking cold sub-zero plus 100-degree heat. So we get both. It just sucks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing good about it. It's similar in Michigan. It's similar in Michigan where, like, in the summer, you get pretty miserable, and then in the winter, you're like, well, how is it this bad still? But the thing, what bothers me most about the cold, though, is less the snow and the cold so much as is the dry air, because I feel like that messes with you in ways that you don't immediately pick up on. Like you wake up in the morning and like your whole like chest and throat's really sore, and it's like, well, where did that come from? And then, like, I would just get profuse nosebleeds. That might be TMI, but like, just all the time when I was in Michigan. So that's kind of the respite I get down here. But I don't know, man. I can't handle it anywhere. I just need to be inside all the time.
No, I get the same thing with the cold, dry winters.
I do, too.
They totally dries you out.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrid.
Yeah.
And right now we're actually in line to have one of the hottest Junes in recorded history, and July as well. Mm-hmm. It's killing all my raspberries.
Oh man, that's a bummer.
It is.
Yeah,
because like raspberries are those like I tried to grow raspberries and I grew a plant for like 3 years and it never bore fruit. But when they actually come, I find they're just so delicious when you make them yourself. So that'll be a sad day as they go.
I just can't do raspberries. I'm sorry.
Really?
There's seeds. I like the flavor, but the seeds are they're like the little bastards in your mouth. And
they don't bother. See, like, it's pomegranate that really bothers me in that way. I feel like pomegranate is some kind of swindle. Like, I feel like they sell you on this really great juice, but they don't tell you just how annoying those seeds are and the fact that they are really the majority of the it's like, I feel like basically eating a pomegranate is like buying a timeshare. Like, it's not going to go well ever, but everybody thinks that they've got a way to game the system. Like, oh no, you knock the seeds out with a spoon and it's totally fine. No, it's not. It never is.
No,
but they just keep you coming back with that juice, man.
You put them underwater.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way you do it.
That's the way you do it.
Oh, okay.
Spoon.
Come on, man. What is this?
It's like you knock on like a half of a pomegranate, like you cut it and you knock on it with a spoon and it's supposed to knock them out. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that you guys are lying. I'm just saying that I'm extremely doubtful.
Pomegranates are one of those things that if you give me one and it's pre-seeded, like just here's some pomegranate seeds and here you go. I'm like, sweet, thank you. But I'll never buy one.
Yeah, I just feel like that's like too much work.
Yeah.
It's like nature's version of that vacuum seal packaging. Like it's going to take forever and you might cut yourself.
You just eat the stuff that's around it, right? The wax. That's what I do. Just bite into.
I mean, that's great. I mean, I'm sure it's got lots of vitamins, and I'm sure there's a website out there that says that that's great for you.
When I was
there's some health website out there that's all about it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Grind it up in your smoothies.
That just reminds me, when I was like 14, I've been vegan for like 2 years at this point, maybe a year at this point, and somebody told me all real vegans eat the core of apples. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I started eating the core of apples. I don't recommend it, by the way.
Yeah, that sounds like I was on a kick like that for a little while, where someone was like, "Oh, you can eat the whole apple, eat it like from the bottom rather than around the sides," and that didn't last long. And you just pick your battles. Like you don't have to eat the whole thing. Like the planet's not, like, climate change is not because you're not eating the core of the apple. It's okay.
It's because you're not eating the rind of the orange.
Touche.
So you're in Texas right now, getting your PhD, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So why would you want to glutton for that kind of punishment? Not just Texas, but PhD in general.
Well, because the downside, it's true, is living in Texas, but the upside is that as a graduate student, I make a ton of money. So that was a joke. No, well, I mean, I'm at Rice University in the Department of Anthropology, and I'm basically studying climate change and how people think about things like meat that have cultural significance differently than they seem to when they talk about fossil fuels. And I sent out a pitch that was more or less like that to a lot of schools, and Rice University accepted me, and so I'm here. And it's not like I didn't try to sell them on the idea that I love to be in Texas. I mean, Houston's okay. Like, when you're here, you don't necessarily feel like you're in Texas. A lot of people are not from Texas who are here, and it's. I mean, like I said, the weather is not quite as horrible. It's like at least the winters are mild. And I like doing the research. I mean, it's interesting, and Houston's an interesting city, not always in a good way, but I think it's pretty cool. In a lot of ways, I wonder if Houston is like the city of the future, and I mean that in like the worst way. So like, it's just like it's very sort of like neoliberal. Like, people are very cool with a lot of things here, like socially, but they have a very privatization sort of based way of looking at the world. And it's also a huge hub for like oil and gas. So there's a lot of sympathy to that. And it's a very diverse city, but it's still a very, in a lot of ways, like gentrified and very, very segregated city. Which I find, as a sort of social scientist, I find interesting, even in the the things that we might not necessarily find pleasant.
So, what gave you the desire to start go down this path of study?
Well, I think it really came out of doing a lot of activism and sort of working at activist organizations and volunteering with a lot of activist organizations, and feeling like I was 100% behind the messages of these organizations and the sort of end goals, but I felt like they had sort of a simplistic way a lot of the time of looking at the problem and looking at how to solve it. And it's not to say necessarily that they're wrong or ineffective. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it seemed to me like I wanted to get a better sense of where the sort of disjuncture lies between people like me who say look at images of factory farming and animal laboratories and things like that and get very viscerally upset and feel very provoked by it. And people who, for whatever reason, either don't or feel upset by it, but don't actually want to do anything about it. And so that got me interested in looking at what do animals mean to different kinds of people, and what are the ways in which people are sort of learn to think about them in that way. And that became a really interesting question for me, and it became something that I thought was kind of where my activist energy started to be moving towards, is sort of trying to understand the people that I was talking to, or maybe arguing with, or handing out pamphlets to. And I found that that's a very fruitful way to sort of examine that, even though I think that there is, I think a certain amount of specialization is okay. It's okay for some people to focus on asking these questions and other people focusing more on a certain level of action. But I'm really interested in doing this kind of work in a way to create a dialogue with people who are full-time activists, and even people who are unsympathetic towards the cause and might even be potential opponents, to sort of see if there's any ways we can come to some kind of effective compromise in sort of small pockets of these sorts of issues. Obviously, I think that there's certain people with whom we'll never be able to find a compromise, and I have a sort of class struggle approach to that sort of thing. Like, we're never going to get the CEO of Tyson Foods to not do what's in the best interest of Tyson Foods, but I think that there are people with whom we can find some common ground, or at least fight similar battles that serve both of our interests.
So when you talk about people that, we're never going to serve their interest, do you think part of that has to go with the whole idea of not just capitalism, but the corporatism, where the board's, sole purpose is for the shareholders, not for the society in general?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I don't think that, I think that for certain people, particularly people who are in the animal rights movement and who are in a lot of social justice movements, ethical arguments saying like, this is the reason why you should care about this, I think that sort of thing can work. I think it can be very persuasive. But I don't think that corporations have logic like that. I think with corporations, you have to speak in the terms they understand, which is going to be a loss of profit, and it's going to be a struggle all the way. Now, that's not to say that there aren't certain people who have sympathies, and I think that you can look at, say, John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, in advocating for vegan diets to a certain extent. But I think that we've also seen the limits of that sort of thing, and anyone who's concerned about issues of food and issues of class inequality can absolutely attest to the limits of that, and how it can actually sort of drive a wedge between people who care about issues of, say, food sovereignty and issues of class inequality, and people who are interested in animal rights and veganism, for example. Yeah.
So tell me if I'm reading into this wrong, but it sounds like you almost wanted to
way off
to really
next question. No, just kidding.
No, to like kind of study the difference between like what I would call like lifestyle veganism and activism compared with animal rights activism, and how the approach is going to be better suited for one or the other.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is that kind of like where your studying is leading you, like
okay,
to like really showcase the difference between the two, and where the actions are going to be better suited?
I think that's a component of it. So my particular field of interest is in Denmark. I'm particularly interested in Denmark because they have a higher per capita meat consumption than the U.S., but they also have a very vibrant green energy sort of movement there, and they also have a pretty vibrant animal rights community. And so it's interesting to me looking at the ways that certain arguments are leveraged. And in many ways, I think that the Danish animal rights groups are not really any different from the English and the North American groups. They employ a lot of the same logic, and in fact, I think use a lot of the same basic outlines for their organizations. And they make some very particular sort of ethical arguments, which I obviously agree with. And they do have a lot of recommendations for sort of the way you can change your lifestyle and you can sort of purchase more vegan products. And I think that can work in a sort of city like Copenhagen, where you have a pretty vibrant middle class and people have a lot of access to these sorts of options. But it does also produce sort of a cleavage wherein you can't make those same kinds of arguments with people for whom, when there's a larger sort of spectrum of economic opportunities available, and you have to sort of decide what your target audience is going to be, and in the end, what kind of demographics you want to be and political ideologies you want to be sympathizing with. So I wouldn't say that my research is necessarily, or my driving question is necessarily just about the difference between a sort of intersectional or animal liberation oriented veganism and sort of a consumer style veganism, but it's definitely a matter of interrogating the sort of ideological underpinnings that are driving the sort of activism that we're doing, and maybe taking a sort of a step back and thinking about if that's really the way we want to go. And I don't think that just applies to veganism. I think it applies to a lot of different forms of activism. So, for instance, I wrote a paper on what the Sea Shepherd was doing in the Faroe Islands. Faroe Islands is a small island nation. There's like 55,000 people who live there, and they're protesting this whale hunt. And one of the sort of forms of rhetoric that was being used in one of their previous campaigns was basically that the Faroese need to sort of join the rest of the world and get out of the Stone Age. Or, I mean, they didn't use these exact words, but the rhetoric was very much one of like, join the world. Like, we recognize this as being outmoded now and you need to join us. But one of the points I was making is that the whale hunt was itself something that the Faroese took very seriously, precisely because it differentiated them from the rest of the world and gave them a very strong sense of national identity. And so if you want to approach an issue like that, I think it's important to think about that, because what you're doing then is you're simultaneously sort of drawing on this sort of globalized notion of food production, in which you're saying, like, because the Faroe Islands, there's not much that you can grow there. It's not very fertile land because it's in the North Atlantic. So on the one hand, they're sort of subtly saying, like, well, you should eat vegetables. And it's like, well, but where are these vegetables coming from? They're coming from all over the world. And how good is that really for the planet and for animals writ large? And on the other hand, what you're saying is you're actually reinforcing to them the idea that this practice that they're engaging in is making them different from the rest of the world. And so I think that can be a bit counterproductive. And that's not to say that I think in any way that the Faroese whaling practice is acceptable, or that it somehow trumps the lives of animals. But I think that rhetoric can actually be very alienating and counterproductive. And it may work in say another place like Japan, where maybe there's a different sort of national discourse that's much more interested in a sort of idea of itself as being this sort of world leader in all sorts of things, and is more concerned about global opinion. Whereas in the Faroe Islands, I suspect that may be very different. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have learned from the animal rights community over the last 10, 15 years or so is that as a community, we don't fucking understand nuance. So
no.
so how is like when you have like valid arguments based on tactics and their appropriateness and their effectiveness, how is that? How do people take that and respond to that?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways it can go. And I definitely agree with the point that it does not really like nuance, because I feel like you very quickly get into a sort of factionalism where on the one hand, you'll have maybe some people who are very into being critical of everything, but are probably not necessarily on the forefront of engaging in a lot of actions themselves. Which, it depends on who you're speaking with. But that's to say, I think there's certain people that will take the criticism. But I think that the people who are doing a lot of the work and a lot of the more organized work and a lot of the more funded work are probably going to be less sympathetic to it. I don't think that's necessarily always the case. And Sea Shepherd, to their credit, in the most recent endeavor in the Faroe Islands, had at least changed their rhetoric, if not their tactics, in saying that they thought that this was something that needed to start and come from the Faroese people themselves, which I think is a notable difference from the way that it was approached in the previous campaign. But I do think that people don't understand nuance, and I think people are very invested in doing activism the way they want to do it a lot of the time. And so I think it becomes difficult, especially if you don't have a previous relationship with an individual or organization, to sort of come at them and say, well, why don't you try doing it this way? And they're like, well, I like doing it this way. And I think it points to the fact that I think people become activists for a lot of different reasons, and I don't think it's always a matter of being the paragon or desiring to be the paragon of sort of moral fortitude in the world. I think people do activism for a lot of the same reasons they do other things, which is not a bad thing, but it's to say that I think certain people like to be very loud, and I think certain people like to be very condemnatory in their approach. And I think that can work sometimes. But if you're someone who is more invested in the tactic because of what it does for you personally than you are in the results and what the bigger picture is, I think it can be very hard to convince somebody of that. So that's a very long way of saying I agree with you. But I think part of this also has to do with trying to find places to have dialogue with people who don't necessarily think like us. And I think that actually social media is a very bad example of people on the one hand cordoning each other off, and on the other hand just getting into blowout arguments about things that would be handled so much more civilly if they were talking even on the phone or in person. I was talking with some friends recently, and I think we basically concluded that trying to have any kind of political disagreement on Facebook, even between people who agree on almost everything, is kind of like driving a car with no brakes over a rickety bridge with bees coming out of the air vents. Like, it's just going to go off the rails almost immediately, and someone's feelings are going to get hurt. I had a friend last week who just said her whole status was, "I think The Big Lebowski is overrated," which personally offended me, but I didn't get into it. And, it's people somehow managed to get upset over that. So I think that I wonder if there's a better way for us to have these kinds of conversations than on like Twitter and Facebook, and to actually sit down with people and try to be a little bit more patient with them to get, to see each other's point of view. And I wonder if that could create some more nuance, because I just feel like when you try and parse these things over Facebook, it so quickly becomes this sort of sniping, snarky witticisms where one person one person gets defensive and the other person gets aggressive, and it just goes nowhere and then creates further divisions.
So how much of the online presence do you feel is a result of a slightly older generation utilizing these tools where this isn't their main form of communication beforehand, and maybe like the next generation coming up will utilize the nuances inside social media where people that are a little bit older, like myself, just don't get that. Like, we don't see the lines. Because I look at a lot of the youth, and it seems like the extreme youth. What I'm talking about still the teens now. They don't necessarily have the same problems with the nuance on the online culture that it seems like the older generations do.
I actually would be really impressed by that. I don't have any teenagers that I know of really in my newsfeed, so I'm not really aware of their level of literacy. So maybe that's a problem on my end that I should be more tuned into. But I guess for someone my age who's 30 and has, friends who are between, like 25 and 40, a lot of the time, I just find it often doesn't go well unless you have a really long-standing relationship with that person. I hope I'm wrong. But I do feel like, and maybe we can create a better language for it. And I feel like when we do have more successful social media conversations, it involves an awful lot of padding. It involves an awful lot of, I know you're not saying this, and like, I know you wouldn't say this, and I totally get what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of caveats you got to throw in there that make for very long and sort of unwieldy Facebook posts. And I feel like it's almost not suitable to the format of a lot of things where, like with Twitter and 140 characters, like it's much easier to just snipe at people and be a little snarky. And like, I love a good snarky tweet as much as the next person, but like, if you're doing it to people that you're trying to have a dialogue with, that's not going to work. I don't think so.
This is where I personally fall off, because I don't do social media anymore at all. Okay, Jordan's looking at me like, well, you do a little bit. I do have an Instagram account that's very like cultivated.
But can you really have arguments on Instagram? Like, I feel like that's different, isn't it? Yeah. So,
no. I mean, I really have Instagram so I can follow my daughter and see what she's doing. I mean, it makes me sound a lot older than I am. I'm only, in my mid 30s, but she's almost 10, so she does all that shit.
Can we get real curmudgeon-y here for a second?
Yeah.
Damn kids. Let me put on a sweater vest. Hold on.
No, but so I don't do Facebook. I've never signed up for Facebook. I had a Twitter for a while. I got rid of it just because it just seemed like too much bullshit all the time. Like it never made me feel uplifted ever. So I'm like, why the fuck should I do this?
This conversation is making me feel like I actually I'm addicted to Facebook. Like I think I might seriously have a problem. I mean, I think that's great. Like I actually found myself like yearning for that kind of life as I was thinking about it. So maybe that's a lesson to me.
So,
but go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what makes you yearn for that other side?
Well, I just feel like it's so easy for me. I mean, I think there's a lot of good things about social media, and I don't want to be too hard on it because I can get a lot of different perspectives very quickly and keep up with the most recent memes, and that's important. But there is a sense in which you feel like you're in line at the bank or something, or well, I mean, come on, who goes to the bank anymore? But some contemporary example, you're in line at the grocery store or at Blockbuster Video, and you just are bored, and so you immediately just go to the phone and you start flipping it out and you start flipping through things, and it's just this. It's all designed to be infinite. Like you can never get enough of it, and it creates this sort of sense of. I mean, this is just my opinion, but I feel like it creates a sort of sense of very short attention spans. And then I try and sit down and read an actual book for actual work, and it's just very hard for me to concentrate. And I just wonder if it shifts your temporality in such a way that if I got out of that, maybe I could just sit down and read a book more easily.
I mean, I don't know how anyone else is with it, but like when I cut the cord as far as like TV and stuff goes, it freed up so much of my life. I felt like unbelievably so. So like I still watch, TV shows and stuff. I still have, the streaming content crap, but it's very pick and choose. It's not just turn on and have infinite amount of mindless, numbing entertainment coming my way. So
yeah, you can actually just select what it is that you want to watch, and that kind of creates a conceptual differentiation with everything else.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting from a marketing standpoint, like that most people, if you don't get their attention within the 5 seconds nowadays, then you've lost them.
Right. I mean, we're all moving that fast, which is kind of horrific to me. Like it's terrifying.
Yeah. And I think that has created a huge decline as far as like the news media is concerned, but also makes it really hard to get information across as an activist. Mm-hmm. So how do we, bridge that gap and actually make it useful?
That is a really good question. I just got dead air for you on that. I don't know. I mean, I think it's to the point where I think it's, if you're just walking down the street and someone is like, hey, here's a vegan outreach leaflet, someone can be like, oh, okay. But if you're walking down the street and you're listening to something on your phone, you're listening to a podcast, or you're staring down at it, it makes it much more difficult to approach the person, and it makes it much easier for them to not only ignore you, but to feel like you have invaded their personal space because they're occupied and they're sort of cordoned off from the flesh and blood world around them. And I don't really know how we approach things. I feel like that's something that Nick Cooney would have a lot to say about, but I don't know.
That I haven't been leafleting in years, and just the way you just mentioned it would make it feel like it'd be a lot harder now than it probably was, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I handed out about 10,000 leaflets with vegan outreach, not to brag, but about like 8 or 9 years ago, and I think that makes it easier to sort of avoid. I mean, it makes it easier to avoid a lot of things, right? But I think that's one of those things, where is it's sort of cutting you off from the flesh and blood world around you. And I like vegan outreach. I like that as a form of outreach. I think it can be effective, but I don't know. I don't know if how much it can withstand the sort of social media world in our cell phones. I'm not sure how we can, and I'm also not sure of the degree to which we want to sort of emulate that, or if it might be better sometimes to sort of put that to a halt. Like I think that, actually like attending protests Well, I don't think protest is always the correct mode of responding to something. I think it can be very effective in sort of stopping people in their tracks and stopping people in their sort of everyday haze and snapping them out and going, oh, okay, these are people who are really here, who really want my attention, and they're using this analog form of communication, this sign, to like communicate what they want. So I think that can be really effective, and I think that's that might be a sort of curmudgeon-y response to that, of saying like, well, we got to go back to, you know, what we were doing in the 1960s. I'm sure there's definitely a role for incorporating, you know, contemporary marketing understandings. And obviously I'm a big supporter of looking at social science literature in order to be more effective. But I also would just say I don't think we can count out the sort of tried and true methods sometimes too.
So with all of the research that you're doing right now, has any of it challenged your initial belief structure in a way that you were unexpecting?
That's a really good question. I would say it has. Yeah. I mean, I think that looking at, for example, I mean, studying cultural anthropology and looking at the types of relationships that a lot of different groups of people have in the world to non-human animals, I think is very important for us to keep in mind. And I think it doesn't have to mean that we don't have to care about animals. It doesn't mean that we have to think that anything outside of our direct purview is none of our business. But I do think it gives you some perspective on sort of where you can be most effective and where things are happening in a way that you might not fully understand, and maybe you should take time to sort of understand that. And that's not to suggest that any sort of cultural worldview that is not dominant is therefore correct, and we should therefore treat it as above criticism. But I think that we should keep a few things in mind. I mean, I think one thing, for example, is that so we just had the Yulin Dog Festival. And this you know issue that becomes a newsworthy issue every year, right? Where a few people eat some dogs, and like it seems like the Western world just loses its mind, and that's a place where I think having more awareness of what it is you're actually dealing with, and also at the same time keeping in mind what is here at home. And the sort of the numbers involved, for one thing, among others, and not to mention also the sort of racial dynamics that are involved, and the sort of traditions of white supremacy that we might be unwittingly involving ourselves in. I think that's all stuff that would be really, really beneficial for people to learn. I mean, number one, not engage in white supremacy, but also, which is important. I'm going to say it. And then also, you know, I think there's a real wedge driven between serious animal rights activists and members of the broader left every time something like this happens, or when Cecil the Lion happens, and a whole bunch of people who I think most of whom do not even speak for the animal liberation movement start heaping outrage about this one or a few animals who have died, and do so in a way that is that it is in effect very marginalizing and suggests a real disconnect between the suffering of animals and the suffering of people under racial forms of oppression. And so I think one of the tasks that we have, if we want to help both of these causes, is to sort of cultivate, which, you know, you guys and your podcast and a lot of other people are doing, is to, you know, start to develop ways of bridging these gaps and thinking about these things in more critical ways. And I think that there's a lot of alliances that we can make if we do that. But I think that studying cultural anthropology, or studying the cultural practices of, you know, people outside of North America and Western Europe, can be really helpful in giving us a greater appreciation of the complexity of the way that people can understand animals. And yeah, I guess that'll be it. Yeah.
Already this year, there was a case of activists protesting in Chinatown in New York City.
Oh yeah,
the Chinese Americans had nothing to do with the Yulin Dog Festival, and that's the racist that's coming out.
And we posted about it on our site.
I saw that.
Yeah, and then like we had people arguing about how, you know, that it's bullshit, and that no one's above reproach. And it's like, it's not about being above reproach. It's what you're doing, how you're doing it, who you're doing it to. Is it that appropriate?
Yeah, and there's a whole history here that I think a lot of people who might have sensitivity towards non-human animals just are just very ignorant of the sorts of histories that are involved with the ways in which, say, the valuation of human non-white, non-male, what have you, human life has been compared to animal life, and the complexities that come along with that, and the sort of racist tropes that can be very easily fallen into. And that's something that I think we as a movement have to be very careful about examining, and in being active allies towards those other organizations. And but on the other hand, I also think we have to be mindful of clarifying the people who are just not with us, because there's so many people who are going to be upset about dogs, but then those people just go and eat a ham sandwich. I mean, they are not. They are not activists in an animal liberation way, but they actually provide really easy ammunition for people on the left who don't care about animals and who don't want to. So I think that I think on the one hand we want to be able to draw people in and say, like, well, why don't we be less hypocritical and think more about the pig from the ham sandwich, and then at the same time saying, like, well, but these people don't necessarily represent the kind of movement that we want to see.
And on the flip side, unfortunately, some of the major national and international organizations are so single issue focused that they don't see the intersectionality of all the issues. And so on the flip side, where we're, there's the guy who says, I don't like killing dogs, but then eats a ham sandwich. There's animal rights organizations that are doing pretty much the exact same thing. And you're just like, you don't fucking represent me either.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's, yeah, it's a bummer, man. It's a bummer.
Yeah, I guess like it's just it's an interesting time where I think we're, as an animal rights nationwide activist, I think we're more focused on intersectionality than we ever have been. At least it's being talked about more than I've ever heard it being talked about before. So I guess that's a good thing. But I just hope that there was more change.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll see if I get the sense that this is this type of sort of movement-wide sort of like epistemic shift, like a shift of consciousness that probably is going to hit the large organizations, the large, well-funded organizations last. Mm-hmm. I get the sense that if you're a nonprofit, and you're relying on donations, and you're relying on substantial donations from people who are extremely wealthy, they're going to have that's going to bring a particular kind of perspective to that donation, and that donation is obviously always predicated to a certain degree on the wishes of the person making the donation. Whereas if you get a lot of these perspectives that are coming from grassroots organizations and people of color who don't have necessarily the same kind of political and financial weight behind their words, so it might make the large organizations the last one to take it up. But I hope they do, and I think that hopefully it will that will improve. But I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm trying really hard to be optimistic.
But being a nihilist is so fun sometimes.
It is.
Oh God. I don't know why.
Actually, it's really not. I actually find it horrifying. But let's go with that. Let's go with that.
I'm
everything's shit, guys.
I'm the weird one where like nihilism really kind of uplifts me because it's so like absurd that you kind of just realize, oh yeah, this shit doesn't really matter that much in the the greatest scheme of things. So let's just do the best we can and move forward.
Right.
Yeah.
I sympathize with that.
An optimistic nihilist.
I go
kind of like, oh, it's all for nothing, but ooh, look at the kitty.
These mountains are beautiful.
Hey, but you're talking about memes. That's why I love the nihilist Lisa Frank memes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with those.
Yes.
God, I love those. I have one hanging up in my office. People walk by all the time just like, what the hell?
I was actually going to bring that up, but then I was afraid it would be too obscure, so I'm really glad you did.
I have
Makes me feel at home.
I have the dolphin jumping out of the ocean, smiling with a rainbow behind it that says, what does it say? Waiting for the absolute nothingness to swallow me whole.
That, and you know what? that sounds a lot like writing a PhD dissertation.
So,
like, if you look at the PhD comics, I don't know if you guys are familiar with those. Maybe you're not because you have real lives and careers. But like the PhD comics and the Nihilist comics, I think you'll find often line up quite a lot. There's just this there's just this notion when you're doing, because you have to understand something, or at least convince someone that you understand something so well when you're in grad school that you spend so much time on it that eventually it just feels like, what does anything mean anymore? It's just 3 a.m. and you're sitting in your own cold sweat, lying on the floor going, it doesn't matter. Why does it matter?
Oh God. So what is your origin story for activism? Like, what brought you towards activism?
Well, I actually think it went back to being a child for me, and having a mother who really imprinted in me the idea that animals are basically like persons like everybody else. And she never put it in those terms, but that was basically the way that she looked at it, is like, oh, well, those are like other creatures and they experience the world just like we do, and we should be nice to them. Now, she was never vegan or vegetarian or necessarily made that sort of leap from, say, companion animals to animals in agriculture, but it made me very sensitive to other species. And I distinctly remember like shoving a kid at recess on the playground because he was stomping on ants, because I was like, oh, those are like little people. That's terrible, you know? And it sort of, I think it sort of laid dormant for a long time. I mean, I had sort of obviously a sympathy and an affinity for like my dog. And then I think once I got to college and started taking ethics classes, and I became interested in philosophy and started talking to people who were vegetarians, who I just relentlessly criticized for it, of course, like we all do when we're trying to stave off an insecurity. After a while, I just started to feel more and more guilty about eating meat, and then got to a point where I actually wanted to do something. And so I went out on a street corner out by Michigan State University, where I did my undergrad, and started just handing out vegetarian leaflets, thinking this is a good thing. And then had several people like call me a terrorist and call me a radical. And I was like, oh, terrorists and radicals, what's this about? And so then I started researching anarchism and getting more into like more radical left-wing literature, and became so you know, in a way my animal activism sort of brought me into networks with people of other social justice persuasions around issues of feminism and racial justice and economic inequality and anti-war activism. And so I think I sort of found a community through that. And it was at a transitional point in my life. I mean, I was like 19 or 20 at the time, and kind of like, what am I doing? You know? And so I think I sort of found communities with people who I found very passionate about things and were moving with purpose. And I think I sort of brought that onto myself and became vegan. And I think so I think it kind of caught me at the right time, where I was sort of forming my identity. And so from there, I basically started doing all kinds of, you know, forming, you know, clubs and groups, and attending protests and organizing protests, and it's just kind of shot off from there. And then I spent some time actually like going on the road with various animal rights organizations, and felt like I believed in the mission, definitely, but that I wanted to ask these kind of questions that I was telling you about earlier. And so then I sort of started reading a lot about social science and about like the social science of activism. And so that kind of brought me to where I am today, I guess.
So you said you kind of studied like anarchist principles. Do you classify yourself as an anarchist?
You know, I don't so much anymore. I tend to use the term socialist in the broadest possible sense, because I feel like it's very vague. Mm-hmm. And I do it and I do it particularly because anarchism is a form of socialism. It's, you know, it's just especially critical of the state form of socialism. And I tend to sort of intentionally not clarify that, because I'm not as interested, at least at this point, in getting into a lot of debates on the left about anarchism versus Marxism or this particular type of Marxism. I mean, I get enough factionalism within the animal rights movement, so I kind of feel like I want to be able to move as freely as I can between different activist spaces. So, for instance, I've been a member of this group at the university that's called just Rice Left. And the idea is that we're anyone who identifies to the left of the Democratic Party. And in that group, we have anarchists and we have some Maoist sort of Marxists, and we've got people who identify as progressives. And we all have a very productive conversation and productive activism when we're doing these sorts of things. And so, like, I have less need for, say, arguing about the results of the Second International, or about, like, was Murray Bookchin right, or was, like, Marx right? Like, that's just that stuff. I think there's a lot of use to those debates. I'm not saying that they're not useful, but for what I'm doing, I find it more advantageous to just say, like, I'm a leftist, and to kind of move. And so there, we disrupted Tony Blair when he came to Rice, and we handed out pamphlets that it looked like were from his organization, but they were actually talking about the economic plundering that he was going to do in Africa. And, none of us had to clarify whether we needed a dialectical process or we needed to abolish the state in order to do that. So it's just, I'm kind of copping out, but I guess it's because I feel a certain sort of sympathy to all of these types of people. And I as I said before, I'm kind of interested in saying, like, okay, well, where can we move forward together on this? And then, we can have disagreements when we need to. But right now I'm sort of enjoying not picking sides.
To me, it's not about picking sides, but I've been involved in animal rights for so long and been in so many debates that my personal ideology behind it is pretty set in stone. Like, it's pretty, I feel, very examined. But when it comes to, like, my political ideologies, like with anarchism and leftism in general, progressivism, whatever you want to call it, I haven't really explored that as much. So I find it personally rewarding to explore it, because it's the few times that I get to have that personal challenge and self-reflection anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair. And I think, these are, like I said, I think these are debates and things that are worth fleshing out and understanding. And I mean, I guess for my part, I really sympathize with a lot of anarchist organizations. So I wrote a book chapter on Food Not Bombs, and I think that Food Not Bombs is an amazing organization that does a lot of really good things. And I think that one of the things I like most about them is they have their own political bent. I mean, they're an anarchist organization, and but they're also interested in animal liberation and anti-war activism. But they're able to do that without sort of getting bogged down in a lot of rhetoric and sort of defining themselves so particularly. And I think it allows them a lot of space to move in a lot of different places. And I think that the fact that they're actually giving people food, which is a real material need, and it's not a pamphlet or a slogan, actually makes it a very dynamic and effective organization. And I interviewed the co-founder of Food Not Bombs, Keith McHenry, and one of the things he said was, certain Food Not Bombs branches really like to brandish the anarchist A, and that's cool. But for me, it was always more important to do anarchism than to call yourself an anarchist. And I think that allows you to elicit a lot of sympathy from a lot of types of people who might not necessarily be ready for the radical love that is smashing the state, and I don't mean that derisively. I mean, seriously, like, I think people that's too much for a lot of people, and I think that if you can pull them in with sort of a friendly conversation and some real good vegan food, then you can start building the relationships to cultivate these sorts of, what is in our society a very alternative political persuasion. So for me, it's a much more processual interest, like, and I like the flexibility of a lot of anarchist groups like that. But on the same token, I really, as much as I always try to make consensus models in all the kind of organizations I'm in, I do sort of respect the efficiency with which organizations that allow hierarchy are able to sort of mobilize. But then obviously that creates its own set of problems. So it's something that I sort of find each group has something that can be useful in different sets of situations. So I look at it less like I have my own personal set of ethics and my own sort of politics, but the way I tend to understand things like anarchism or particular strands of Marxism, I think it's much more academic, because I think I kind of look at them as tools. Like, these are lenses through which we can look at a particular context. And I think there's ways in which different contexts can be useful. So I think my ethics is actually very anarchist. I mean, my ethics is very much about doing the right thing. And it's not about a sort of, I feel like Marxism is this very purports itself to be very scientific and unbiased, whereas with anarchism, it's like, no, well, there's a sense of right and wrong, and there is a sense of we should help those who need help, and we should not consider ourselves better than anybody else just because of material things that we might happen to have or what have you. So I guess I would just separate the political, I would say the political assets of different sort of factions from my own personal ethics.
Wasn't it Marx who said to each according to his need, from each according from his ability, or something like that? And I'm totally bastardizing.
Yeah. It was like from each according to We all get it. Yeah. We all know.
No.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. The self-determination aspect of anarchism really draws me into it, especially. But I do feel anarchists, and myself included, really fell at bridging the gap and creating alternative institutions. And I think Food Not Bombs is one of the few that have actually done that job. They have created alternative institutions that bridge communities together.
Absolutely.
And the thing about Food Not Bombs is, like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily promote itself as an anarchist organization. I was even applauded by a judge who just wasn't very aware of what Food Not Bombs was about all my work that I've done with Food Not Bombs. They were very pleased.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So I think that's a testimony right there.
Yeah.
But what I like about it is it's this processual nature, wherein, like, if you're doing this and you're doing it reliably and you're serving a very real community need, that produces grounds for establishing relationships with new people who you might not otherwise talk to, and people for whom, if you met them on the street, might actually be very reactionary and you could easily get into a fight with them. But I feel like giving people who are hungry food is one of the things that's got to be one of the most difficult thing to argue is wrong of anything that you can. Of anything. Now, granted, the police certainly don't have a problem doing it, but I think it can market itself as being a very mainstream thing, even though what you're doing and what the sort of ideological underpinnings of it are very radical and very anti-capitalist. I think that can be really effective.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just love the aspect that I've actually had conversations with the most far right people in the world who actually applaud Food Not Bombs. It just tells you, like, yeah, they're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're doing something real. Like, this is not symbolic. This is not rhetorical. I mean, it can be, and it is in a lot of ways. But I think it also allows you to leverage a lot. I mean, if you're going to a protest for a bunch of people who maybe don't care about animals at all, but you're bringing them vegan food and they're at a sit-in and they're hungry, they're going to eat it. And they're going to feel obliged to hear you out a little bit when you explain why you have vegan and vegetarian food. And so I think I think in real material terms, I think it actually gives us it gives animal rights activists, if we want to approach it that way, sort of a foot in the door and a real sense of leverage when we're approaching the wider left about issues like this, is to say, like, well, we actually have these beliefs, but we're going to provide you with this. And so that, I think, is a space for opening a dialogue and building relationships with people who are doing other things that we believe in and that are just as important.
So besides just doing the work with Food Not Bombs, the article on Food Not Bombs, you've also written about hunting, and specifically with the DNR, right?
Yeah. So I wrote an article for what was at that time the Humane Research Council and is now Faunalytics. And it was basically just looking at the sort of monetary links between the DNR and the hunting lobby, and sort of arguing that if we're going to be trying to press for reducing or banning hunting, we have to think very critically about whether or not the DNR is going to be receptive to that if they're in fact financially very invested in hunting as a practice. And I think that there are financial arguments to be made for other ways of funding the DNR, and I mentioned that in the piece. But I think it's very telling because it points to a sort of relationship between private industry and the state that should make us think a little more critically about our interventions by appealing to the state. Mm-hmm. So we might say like, oh, well, look, there's illegal hunting going on here, and I have friends who are doing anti-hunting work, and they can appeal all they like to the laws, but that's not something that the state is going to be directly responsive to if sort of playing fast and loose with these hunting laws is actually putting money in their pocket, and if the people staffing the DNR are themselves hunters.
What I find interesting about that work is what a lot of people don't realize is domestically, that's mainly what you're talking about, but also when you look at like the global stage, most conservation, like in Africa, is actually funded through large game hunting as well.
Right, exactly.
And so it's a double-edged sword that we have to fight, where we want to say, oh, well, we should be against this large game hunting and trophy hunting, but at the same time, that's the only money coming into these countries to help any conservation effort. Yeah.
That's really complicated, and I'm not always sure what we can do about that. And that leads into some real dangerous questions, and questions about like, what does it even mean to poach? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I was at a conference last year with a woman who had done some work with these organizations that were actually hunting poachers, and there were people who would actually, there were like park rangers, but they carried assault rifles. And what she said is that on the one hand, we have this preconceived notion, because we're completely abstracted from this, of, oh, okay, well, these people are poachers and that's bad, and so these people are protecting with lethal force these rhinos. Well, okay, well, the rhino shouldn't die, but on the same token, like, you have to look at, well, why are people poaching, and really, who are these people? And in a lot of cases, it's people who need money to feed their families because of, extremely economic, dire straits, and also that the people who have these weapons might be shooting people who are not actually poachers. So we have to be very careful not to be, too oversimplifying and too quick to, too quick to advocate violence, especially on a continent that we know, in most cases, very little about.
Especially since, we would just be another version of the white man coming in saying what they should be doing best.
Exactly. And, it can be very easy to say, donate money to an organization and think, oh, they're doing these great things. But what that looks like on the ground is very different from the stated story.
And that also goes into play where donating money to organizations for societies that are extremely economically hard hit can actually do more havoc on their local economic infrastructure. For you take like places where, let's not call anyone out by name, but places that give free shoes to people.
Yeah.
all of a sudden, now people that used to create that economic structure there are now out of a job, and they need free shoes themselves, because no one who's going to buy shoes when you get them for free.
Yep.
Same thing happens with donated clothing. Same thing happens with agriculture, with food donations. It ruins local economies in a lot of senses. Absolutely.
I had a colleague just finish her dissertation when she was doing work in Haiti and covering NGOs there, and the sense that she got is that Haiti's, I forget the percentage, but an enormous amount of Haiti's economy is essentially relief aid from international organizations. Mm-hmm. And what she found, and what others have found, is that those international organizations have essentially just created an infinite loop of getting money from donations to international NGOs that really just reinforce Haiti as being completely dependent on NGOs for its infrastructure, rather than building an independent infrastructure itself. And it's not good for Haiti at all. And if you want to take a historical view on it and look at the fact that Haiti has been systematically disenfranchised by the United States and France in particular for daring to have a slave revolt, it makes you. I think that might put things in perspective of, well, do we really want Haiti to become strong and independent? I'm speculating, but I don't think that those things are necessarily unrelated. So, yeah, nihilism.
10,000 years, nothing will fucking matter.
Yeah, I was on a date recently, and some woman was like, she was like, "Oh, so why are you vegan?" And I was like, we're having a really nice time, and I can just be an infinite well of sadness if we want to talk about this. So do you want to just drink a glass of wine and just talk about nice stuff? And she was like, no, tell me. And I was like, all right then. Strap.
So did that end well, is the question.
I think that I can turn that around. I think that I've done this long enough that I can turn it around.
I always ask people if they want the real answer. Do you really want to know? Yeah. You just want it's for animals. Don't worry about it.
I was like, yeah, but Game of Thrones is on this weekend.
Really, that's all that matters.
That's how I drown out my demons.
Back to Game of Thrones. Start with it and end with it.
Perfect.
So how can people get in touch and find out more information about your work?
Well, oh geez, I really wish I had a business card here. I mean, you can Google me. My name is Drew Robert Winter, and let's see, I have a list of books. Is there going to be a bio up on the thing or something where people can click links, or should I?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah. So, I mean, I wrote a book I wrote a chapter for a book called Anarchism and Animal Liberation, which is a really good book. One of your past guests, Kim Socha, was in it as well. So I encourage people to pick that up. I also wrote a chapter for a book called Educating for Action: Strategies to Ignite Social Justice, in which I write about community organizing in general, but I focus a lot on animal rights activism because that's where I have experience. And then I'm also going to be contributing to a animal-human encyclopedia that's going to come out in October called Humans and Animals: A Geography of Coexistence. So I would encourage people to go and pick up a copy of those if they can. And if they want, they can email me at drewrobertwinter@gmail.com if they want to ask me about nihilist memes and Game of Thrones. Or if they have projects that they want to work with me on, I'm always interested in doing kind of new and interesting stuff with animal rights and with anthropology and sort of the intersection of academia and activism.
And not to mention that you have the perfect Game of Thrones name.
There's some jokes to be made there, but we won't go there.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you haven't missed Game of Thrones yet. I don't know what time it actually starts. But,
no, I haven't. This is actually perfect. And thank you guys so much for having me. I had a blast.
Oh, no, it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for being on.
And we end every episode saying, fuck, shit, damn. Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Fuck, shit, damn.
This week, you heard
Half Dreaming by CFCF.
Right now you're listening to
Never Mess with Sunday by Yppah. Go do me a solid. Go sign in right now to your favorite podcast app that you're using to listen to this wonderful show on. And if they have a rating system, go rate us. They have a reviewing system. Take the 50 seconds to write a snazzy little review. It could really just be a poop emoji. I'd love that. It'd give me smiles.
Like the poop emoji has.
Yeah. And, help the show out. That helps the show out tremendously. The only better thing you can do for the show that doesn't cost you anything is to tell a friend. So go do one of those. Let us know if you do it. Hey, if you tell a friend, that's fucking awesome. So help the show out. And then let us know, because you deserve credit for helping the show out, because you're awesome. And I'll give you a high five or a hug, whichever you prefer. Unless you don't prefer contact, we'll make sure it's consensual.
Thumbs up.
I'll give you a thumbs up.
And there's multiple ways that you can tell a friend. You can join our street team and download and print some flyers to hand out at local events or local vegan eateries, or just pass to your friends. Or you can go online and be social. And while you're there, you should follow us. Like us. On all the social medias. We're friendly. We post things on there every day that we don't talk about on the show. So find us, like us, friend us, whichsidepodcast.com. Click on the social tab.
I don't want to get fancy.
I'm not going to delay this.
So then just fucking do it.
Shit, don't tell me what to do.
Shut your damn mouth. That is really fucking dumb.
That's ableist.
Fuck shit damn.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandante. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.